thank you so much for being here. There's a lot to talk about, but I will be brief and ask you the first question, which is the inspiration for the film. I mentioned, I didn't mean to make light of it, but you're not a slow filmmaker. You work on a deliberate pacing. But so you came in touch with the book by Martin Amis, and then you worked with your producer on starting with. So can you talk about the origin of wanting to make this film?
Yes, I can, and thank you, Florence. I'm going to do my best this evening. It's quite, I think the events of the last couple of days have been quite difficult for everybody. So it's a subject that I've been drawn to and thinking about for many years, actually, before I read the book by Martin Amis. But the Martin Amis book kind of crystallized a point of view, the perpetrator point of view. And that was something which I thought was very, for obvious reasons, very difficult and challenging, but also something which I felt like I was going to, I felt like it was important to, somehow dive into, really.
I mean, it's a film that reflects of the past, obviously, but it's very also, as you started mentioning, it's a film about the present. It's a film about how we feel. It's a film about how we think, how we act, and how we don't act. So while you watch the film and you're obviously in a very heavy period of time in history, that's not that far away. You realize that maybe not that much has changed, and we're in different perspectives, but as a viewer, you're thinking about today when you watch the film as well.
That was certainly the intention. Every effort. I mean, it was always my intention to make a film that wasn't. It's set safely in the past. Actually, in other words, something which had happened 80 years ago and which we could somehow feel a safe distance from. But actually, that it was something a film that should leave us feeling unsafe, and to see our similarities with the perpetrators rather than our similarities with the victims. And I think the difficulties were to serve that idea, which was to make everything as sort of modern as possible in every choice, in the way that we approached the photography, obviously, the production design, in other words. The house and garden and the camp itself, obviously, were not 80 years old at the time. So it was really about trying to create something which felt very much like it wasn't in aspect, it was actually live, and we were dropping into something which was ongoing.
You started talking about cinematography, and then we'll bring you in the conversation, of course. But the cinematography, obviously, is a crucial part of the film because you work with a really excellent DP, Lucas Dahl. And so you have all the exterior shots that are like beautifully like shot and framed, and then all the interior look like surveillance camera, and it brings a very strange feeling in the way the house is set. So I wanted to talk a little bit how you worked with Lucas on creating this way you worked with all these cameras, and it's the feeling it brings to us as a viewer, and obviously you thought about it from the artistic point of view.
Yeah, certainly not. It's very. I mean, film by its nature, obviously, is very glamorizing, and I didn't feel it was right. Well, beyond that, it felt completely wrong to me to sort of look at these people and somehow empower them with the kind of, or fetishize, as is often done, but actually to stand away from them and watch their actions and watch them somehow in an unauthored way, without the kind of authorship of cinema and its conventional techniques. But rather, we used to talk about, which sounds reductive, but I think you'll understand what I mean. We used to talk about it like Big Brother in the Nazi house. It was like sort of, trying to. It was all about dropping in during this week on what was happening in that house in this week, and avoiding drama, actually, which again is kind of counterintuitive in many ways, certainly with most films. But this one, it was watching from an almost sort of anthropological perspective.
I would love to talk about the sound design, which is also part of like the score, the music, and how it all works together. So the score is by Mika Levy, and also, but the sound design of the film is really extraordinary, and it's the first thing that gets you into the film. It's how it brings you and you travel through the film with the sound and the sound design. So can you talk about your collaboration, and can you talk about how much freedom Jonathan gave you to create all this aspect of the film?
Shall I just start, Johnny, just as an introduction, which is that Johnny and I have worked together for decades.
Pretty much.
So that's not many films, but...
You won't let it go, will you?
But he keeps me very busy.
They take a while, but we talked about it right from the beginning. I mean, the idea of obviously not showing, not reenacting the atrocity or the violence was absolutely, that was mandatory for me. And obviously and I wrote the film with that in mind, and the sound being interpretive as it is. We talked very early on about that there were two films that play, the one you see and the one you hear. And Johnny will obviously tell you how we did it.
Yeah, there's it is a film where there's a stark contrast between what you see and what you hear, and obviously the sound is presenting a lot of the horror. And so I first got involved reading the script, and my work began with research and looking through all the documents I could find of witness testimony, and thinking, John and I need to understand every single sound that would have been heard at that place in time, and the way that it was heard, the physicality of sounds within that space. And we made an inventory of all the things to do with nature and the river and the frogs, but also the machine of the camp, and the planes that flew overhead, all the automobiles of the time, and the guns and such like. And then, of course, the guards, and then, of course, the prisoners themselves, and how we would hear those. And we made an enormous document, and that was the kind of Bible to go out and record a library that we made over a period of, all through pre-production, using the resources of the shoot, and going through into post-production. We set about, my team and I, recording a vast array of sounds so that we would be ready when it came to putting film 2 onto film 1. And it's remarkable to have a film where that level of input from the soundscape didn't actually marry the film until sort of fairly late in post. And we were actually we realized that we had to kind of finish up film 1, the everything that you do see, before we could get to the point of putting our sound on, because really if they are to be ignoring it, then film 2 should not inform film 1 in any way. We had an enormous library of sound, and John and I spent 3 or 4 months having already completed the traditional film that we do see, editing and mixing, which is something we do sort of in tandem, putting the extra sounds into place. And I think originally we started quite timidly, and I remember a screening that we had of just watching back where we were, and we invited production designer Chris Oddy down and a few others. And I remember Chris pulling me aside after the screening and saying, "Hey, Johnny, you made it sound like a country park." And there was an expletive in the middle of that sentence as well, because the subsequent screening, we discovered that actually, in order to be accurate, and it needed to sound a lot busier than it did, and we then spent a further couple of months enhancing everything that we had, and we got to the point that we had this strange phenomenon where, if we watched the film through from the beginning, we realized that the film worked incredibly well, and if we came in on a morning, say, and started 30 minutes in, everything would sound wrong, and to the point that we actually thought there was a technical problem, that everything has got too loud or everything. But of course it wasn't that. It was that we ourselves were dialing things out, and that was really our bellwether of, well, we must have done it then, because it worked. So yeah, that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, well, it's incredible. I would like to know also how you came to cast Christian and Sandra, how you approached them, and how long did they take to accept the offer of working on such a film, which is probably very difficult for German actors, if you think about the topic matter. But also, you know, I assume they were aware of your work, which would make every actor excited to work with you. But at the same time, it's a difficult subject. So maybe we start with you, Christian?
Yeah, I had an offer to do a selfie, to describe myself and to talk about why I did become an actor without knowing the script, without knowing the potential role, only knowing this is for a new project of Jonathan Glazer. And what you said, let's go to do this. And then I met John and Jim for the first time in a pub in London, and then John shares with me his investigation, shares with me his thoughts, his vision, the script, the potential role, shares some rare photographs. And I don't know the story, that the family lives very close to the concentration camp and have a pool and a house and a garden. And yeah, from the beginning, I want to be a part of this, of John's vision. And then I had a traditional casting audition with Sandra together to find the energy for the couple and work with this phenomenal script. And then John asked me, and I said immediately yes. So, Sandra, how was your journey?
Yeah, Christian was a bit quicker than me. It took me a long time to commit, not because of Jonathan, but because of the topic. And I received 2 pages from our wonderful casting director, Simone Bear, who was sadly deceased. And she just gave me 2 pages of 2 people arguing, like a couple arguing about leaving or staying. So I said, yes, I'm going to go to the casting. And after that, she gave me the information, what it was about and who it was with. And when I got the information about the topic, I have to say it actually made me feel sick. To me, it was a shock. Because I never planned to be involved in this sort of narrative, or I never felt the urge to portray somebody like Hedwig Höss or somebody similar to her, for different reasons. So we had a lot of conversations about it, and I can only thank John, and he was so patient with me, and that he had all these conversations with me, because we found out we had the same doubts about the portrayal, that it should definitely not be a biopic or anything like that. You know, people do strange things. He doesn't, and you know, everything could have happened with this sujet. So. Yeah, and after we had this conversation, and then it was postponed because of COVID, so it took, I think, maybe almost a year until we had this final conversation where I said, yes, I really want to do this with you and with Christian, obviously, and yeah.
I mean, just to say one thing is that, so I'd seen, first from my point of view, I'd seen Christian in The White Ribbon as the school teacher, and for sure, and I'd seen Sandra in Tony Erdmann, of course, and so they were both very much in my mind, as they were in Jim's mind, actually. But the reason, one of the American psychiatrists, I'm not sure, who interviewed Rudolf Höss in his cell in Krakow, I think, while he was waiting trial, described him as, very surprisingly, I suppose, for me, he described him, he met him, and he psychoanalyzed him as much as best he could. And he described, the terms he used were that he was like a flower-picking school teacher. He was very undynamic, he was very mild-mannered, and all of these things were obviously mind-blowing and fascinating. And I think that, obviously, Christian's a very nice human being, and I think the combination of what I understood of that description and Christian actually was a great fit in just on that level, and it wasn't really until Sandra and Christian were in a room together, and I saw them both together in Berlin in Simone's room, that I remember leaving the room, and before Sandra had committed, and I think even you, I can't remember where we were in our relationship, but I remember saying to Jim when we left the room, I've got to rewrite the script because it's about them. It's not about him or it's about her. It's about them. It's about a marriage to some extent. And so I rewrote, and yeah, bit by bit, we got her.
It's the first time you acted together, correct? No?
No, we had a movie together years ago from Jessica Hausner, Amour Fou.
Oh yes, of course.
And,
yes.
Yeah, I played Heinrich von Kleist, and Sandra was my cousin, and we had some funny scenes together. But when I met Sandra for the first time, I think she's an incredible actress, and I was a little bit nervous. But we had, from the beginning, a connection together. And we had a plane some weeks ago, and we sat not in the same row, and the flight attendant asked us, "Do you want to sit next to your wife?" And yeah, this is our connection.
You're a great director of actors. You know, I'm sorry for all the compliments, but you are. And the way they're directed in this film, I can tell like the physicality of the roles, and I've seen you in other films. It's completely transformed. You act and you move and you walk completely a different way. The way Sandra is moving in the film, she's a different person. Mm-hmm. And I wanted you to talk a little bit how you put the physicality and the movement in the direction. I didn't
put the physicality into it at all, no. I mean, when Sandra and I first started talking about the role and the portrait, it became physical almost immediately, actually. I think Sandra sort of expressed our conversation physically, in terms of how, and I recognized it as soon as she did it, somehow. And so, no, I think it's just how Sandra works. I think it's just it's physical first, I would say.
No, it's not, but okay. It's... To me, it was a really strange experience, I have to add, because normally I try to think about a character for a while, and the physicality comes much later through the psychology, and this time it was really the opposite thing. To me, it was a completely new experience that I've never had before, and it had to do with the conversations that we had with the decision not to give any empathy to these people. So what else can you do? You can observe and you can think about people in your past or parts of your family or whatever, like have an example of somebody who would sort of have this sort of cold or this sort of labor to do every day, or those many children, or something like that. Yeah, so it was a... Yeah.
I think also you have to, reading Hannah Arendt, of course, and she talked about in order that they were non-thinking was one of the terms she used, and in order to think, one has to stop first to think. And I think, and Sandra never stops in her portrait. It's always movement. What's next? What shall I do? What's going on up there? What's going down here? So I think the occupation of her, she occupied herself with activity. There's no reflection. And they're yeah, that's my observation.
Can you also talk about your relationship with your producer, since you worked together before as well, and how you came involved with the project? And
strained.
On which part, yours or his?
No, I'm joking. We are very close, I think. Jim, you should...
That was a good start. You want me to talk? That was to you, that was.
Yeah, but I've said what I think.
It was, yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
What's the question for me?
How did you become involved in the project? Because you approached Jonathan?
No, I mean, yeah, John and I have known each other for a while, and produced his last film, Under the Skin, which Johnnie worked on too, as you mentioned, and we go back a long way. So that's too far back. On this film, no, John sent me it was a preview of the novel, the Martin Amis novel. You know, those sort of. It wasn't a review; it was describing it, and so not to retell the story, but and it just described. It was like a paragraph describing the the story, the idea of the book, and it was a subject matter that he and I had been talking and thinking about, finding a film that could be told in that world, about that, this subject, the Holocaust, for a while, and looking for different ideas within it, very much thinking about the sort of weight of representation in film of that, and wanting to not so much go beyond, but sort of what to say about that, or what question, not what to say actually, what to look for, what questions to ask, and not quite finding that. And there was something that struck John about the point of view, as he said, and that's how it began. So it came from John, and I agreed, and then we read Martin's book, and yeah, that was the sort of key to it, this sort of perspective, this perpetrator perspective. That's how it began.
I mean, it's loosely based, but yeah, it was, the inspiration was just.
Well, what happened after that is, we met with Martin, and he agreed for us to option the book, and then in my memory of it is in thinking about it, of how to do it, that the story told in the book is that, quite quickly John and I, and an amazing researcher, we worked with Lucy Pardy in London, and also our Polish friend Bartek Rański, we quickly came to the primary text, because the novel is fiction. The novel is about a fictional commandant and a fictional camp, but quite quickly when you start to research it, you realize it's based on the Hoss family and Auschwitz. And in encountering the real, the primary sources, and the house, the proximity of the house and the garden to the camp, I think John just felt like, well, the book has taken me here, it's a gateway to it, but that's what I want to do. And then we sort of moved, inspired by sort of jumping off from the novel, we went into a sort of long period of several years of researching of the real Hosses, going to the Auschwitz Museum and Memorial in Poland, and working with their archivists and historians and researchers to sort of find any details of research about them, and that formed the sort of wellspring of ideas that John fashioned the script from, including, I suppose, that reading about the argument between Hedwig and Rudolph about the transfer. I think that was kind of the atom splitter.
Yeah, that particular argument, which is sort of axis or axiom or something of the film itself, or it became from a fragment of testimony from a gardener called Dubiel, who worked in their house, or in their garden rather, and overheard that conversation. In other words, he survived the camps. I think Dubiel was a political prisoner, Polish, non-Jewish, and he survived the war, and then he gave testimony. And in his testimony, he referred in this particular fragment to overhearing the exchange where Rudolf Hoss told his wife that they were going to be transferred, and she hit the roof. And that felt immediately like, well, that's when we're going to set it.
We have to leave the stage. It was a wonderful discussion. You're coming back tomorrow.